Welcome to Waging War, the podcast where we discuss the battle between truth and lies. We believe that if you know the truth will set you free.
Hello and welcome back to Waging War. My name is Sarah Keel and I'm going to sit down with my good friend Kathryn and she's going to share her story with you. So Kathryn, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. So my story starts, I grew up in a wonderful Christian loving home. My dad was a pastor. There was a lot of going to church growing up and being involved in ministry, and I absolutely loved it. We were there every time the church doors were open, and I grew up knowing who Jesus Christ was and what he had done for me, and I had a lot of biblical knowledge and was just surrounded by really godly, wonderful people. But that did come with the pressure side of it too. I did feel like I was in the limelight a lot, and people were always looking to see, you know, what is Kathryn doing? Like, what did she do wrong, or point out my mistakes, because they would kind of put, you know, my dad on a pedestal, therefore they put me on a pedestal and think that I need to act a certain way because of who my dad was or who my mom was, which that applies to other areas, not just ministry. But so there was always that pressure of being a preacher's kid growing up. And when I went to college, unfortunately, I experienced some severe traumatic abuse, and I was sexually assaulted by a man, and I found out later that I was pregnant. And I did not know what to do. I did not feel like I could go to my family. I didn't feel like I could definitely not go to my church. I didn't want to tell
Why is that? Just curious.
I felt judged.
Even if it was done to you?
Yeah, even if it was not what I asked for, I felt judged, that because I had always been taught that abortion is wrong and we always value the sanctity of life, which I believe that in my heart today. But sometimes it's different when it happens to you and you don't know how to react to the situation, and you're so lost and you're so scared that you just act out of impulse, and you don't rely on the Lord and you don't rely on the Holy Spirit to guide you and say, hey, I'm going to get you through this. I have a plan for your life. Instead, I took the plans into my own hands. And I will forever regret that. It's not something I can take back, but it is something that I have learned over time to walk in forgiveness with.
So you did have an abortion?
Yes, I did.
So you did. Now, and I'll get to that in just a second. So whenever the sexual assault happened, which is not your fault, did you blame yourself? Did you feel as if you couldn't go to your church over that, over being sexually assaulted?
I did blame myself. I thought I'd put myself in a situation that wasn't the wisest situation. But at the end of the day, I now know that this was not my fault, but I carried it for years thinking it was my fault because I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. And had I been acting more appropriately, or, you know, just a little bit more spiritually mature and better in my relationships, then maybe I would not have been put in that situation. So for many years, I blamed myself and thought that this happened because of the decisions I made, and therefore God punished me, and this is what happened as a result of my rebellious behavior.
Is that how you related to God? Would you say most of that? So whenever you're hearing the gospel and the Bible growing up, that's kind of what you gather?
Yes.
Okay.
It was very much a culture of legalism. Wonderful, beautiful church I was in, but it was very legalistic. And, you know, somebody that had an abortion, or heaven forbid, somebody got pregnant, I mean, they were just, you know, we didn't have much to do with them, and that was way out of line. And I love seeing that the culture of the church has changed over the years and is a lot more compassionate, because everybody's situation is different and their story is different, and you have no idea why they got to where they are, and why they're in a broken mess, or maybe they're just broken and they don't know Jesus. So how dare us jump on somebody acting worldly that doesn't know Jesus? They're just acting how they know how to act.
Right.
You know, so I grew up with the mindset of you don't get pregnant out of wedlock, and you definitely don't have an abortion. So when it happened, when I became pregnant and I didn't know what to do, my first instinct was, I've got to run. I've got to get out of town. I've got to get away from everybody, because I can't face them with what I have done. when in fact it wasn't just what I had done, it's what had happened to me. And it took me many years to get to that place.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was some of the internal wrestle you had, or was there an internal wrestle, should I say, before choosing to get an abortion?
I knew it was wrong. I know that there is a beautiful value in that sanctity of life and that God has a plan. So I truly believed in my heart of hearts that it was wrong for me to have one. But I caved and gave into my own weakness because I was scared.
Did anyone influence you in that direction?
No.
It was just you kind of...
No, well, I was in a relationship at the time, and he did not handle what had happened to me very well. And so he was very pro, like, you should go ahead and go forward with this.
Gotcha.
So I would say that's a little bit of an influence, but at the end of the day, it was my decision. And I can't tell you how many times I wish I could do it over and my life would look very different today. I would have a teenager right now. And, God has a plan and a reason for everything the way it happens. But if I had it to do over, I would have not had the abortion, just because they don't tell you when you're in there that you're going to have years of grief and you're going to have years of regret and feeling like you are, the black sheep and you're in this category where you've got that T-shirt that you got the A there, that I had the abortion because I was weak and I couldn't do it and I was unsure. So I just went ahead and eliminated the quote unquote problem, which it breaks my heart to even say that because the child is a precious, beautiful gift of life. And I just did not wrap my mind around it at that age. And I'm not saying
How old were you?
I was 20.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it necessarily has to do with age, but spiritually, I had started drifting from the Lord. So I think had I stayed closer to Him through college, it would have been maybe a different story. I maybe would have been stronger in my faith to rely on God to help me get through this situation and help me figure out how I'm going to raise a child on my own.
Do you think at that time you were a believing Christian? I mean, now you understand the gospel more. So was it you just didn't understand your faith that well, but you were a Christian, or would you say, no, I wasn't a believer at that time?
No, I truly believe I was a believer at that time. I think that I was probably more along the workspace, though, where I was trying to do everything that was right and please my family and please others around me. And I was more like a workspace salvation that I was living out at that point in my life, where I was going through the motions. I was going to church. I was, going to small group, memorizing scripture, but I wasn't really totally focused in on Jesus. And I think had I been in a better relationship with Jesus at that time, I would have been able to experience His grace and not gone into denial about everything and had more hope in my life.
And
shame. So, I think I truly believe I was a Christian at that time, but I just think I was in a very weak time of my faith because I had been so distant from God.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I can absolutely relate. When I was 15, I also had an abortion, but for me, the implications of the abortion did not hit my conscience until I was an adult. I mean, it was like I truly treated it, that procedure, like just a medical procedure, and then went about my day. When did it hit your conscience?
It started hitting me in my late 20s because I was ready for children, and I thought, well, I've ruined the opportunity. I was in an unhappy marriage, then walked into a failed marriage after that. So it was a difficult season of my life, but I was ready to have children, and I started to grieve, and really my addiction really started in my early 20s after the abortion, and then it just kind of carried through my 20s.
Did you realize that that's what kind of set you off into addiction?
At the time, I did not.
But now you can see.
I didn't really come full circle with all of this until I started fighting my addiction a couple of years ago, and when I came to Renew and I went through other programs like Celebrate Recovery and started to realize, hey, there's some deeper stuff that you haven't dealt with, and we need to dig into that. And it's okay to dig into that. It's healthy to dig into that with godly fear and godly grace. And I struggled all through my 20s with the addiction. It just continued to grow and grow and grow. And I just continued to drink to bury any of the feelings that I had, because I had a lot of guilt about not having a family. Again, I compare myself to my siblings a lot, and they have their lives very together, and they have all these children, and I wanted that family so bad, and I kept thinking, well, God's punishing me because I had that opportunity, and I did not accept the opportunity that God gave me. I didn't trust Him.
How long did you live with that belief?
Probably about 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah, a long time. And I really started to really grieve my abortion when I walked through the program at Renew, because we dug into shame versus guilt. Guilt being shame is I am bad, and guilt is I did something bad. That never played into my mind until I was walking through that program and realized that, hey, wait a second, I did something that was bad, but that is not who I am forever. And God has forgiven me. Now the consequences are still there, and it's just like, I know all sins are equal in the eyes of God, but they all have different repercussions. So it's something I will always carry with me and I will always deal with, but I no longer look at it as, I'm this terrible person that cannot be forgiven because of what I did. And it gives me the opportunity to give grace and hope to other women that have been through it, instead of being the church member or the friend or the Christian that says, oh my gosh, you had an abortion, I can't talk to you about that. Like, we just don't do that. Instead, it's like, come as you are. God has accepted you and forgiven you. So
that's
I'm very thankful.
Yeah. I mean, it is a big distinction. Like, I've had an abortion. I also think abortion is wicked and evil and dark, satanic even. But when it comes to a person who has had an abortion, that's not how I see them.
Yeah.
Right? Because they are separate from the act of abortion. But what abortion does to women, I mean, abortion is celebrated as something that empowers women, that is good for women, that is helpful. And if you take it away, it's going to destroy women. It's taking away our rights. And I find it to be, at best, fascinating.
Yeah.
That's the logical conclusion. And I don't think it's talked about enough that abortion is often the catalyst of addiction, mental illness, years of mental torture that a lot of women can't even identify that's what's caused it. And you want to know why? And this is just coming to me. The reason why is because it's so socially acceptable. And we've been, I would say, brainwashed as a culture to not see the horrors of what it actually is. We've been so desensitized. We have blood on our hands, and we know we do, but we've forgotten that we do. And we don't realize our soul knows that we have blood on our hands. Our soul knows that something has happened that is horrific, but our mind isn't connecting to it. And so there's like this dissonance inside, and people don't know what's wreaking havoc in their life. For women who have had an abortion, a lot of times they're dealing with things, addiction, mental illness, nightmares, whatever, and they can't pinpoint that it's abortion because we've been so accustomed to not even think that that could be it, because it's okay.
I think we live in such a selfish society that everything is just fix it right here and now, and people just lean in on that. I am all about respecting women and women's rights and all of that, but what about the child?
Yeah.
The child that has no voice. And one of my favorite quotes by Ronald Reagan is something along the lines of, I found that everybody that is pro-abortion is alive.
Yeah.
And so I always think of it that way. And even though I have so much deep regret and grief about what I did so many years ago and would love to redo, I know that there is redemption. And,
absolutely.
That's the whole beauty of Christianity. And it's a slap in the face to God if I don't accept His forgiveness and His grace, because He came to die for all sins. Right. He died on the cross so I don't have to carry this forever. And for me to not give that to Him and surrender it to Him, that is not accepting all the grace that He has sacrificed for me. And it took me years to really wrap my mind around that, because growing up in church, you know all the right things to say and all the right things to do, and then just don't screw up, and try to walk the line. Oh, but then you slip and you fall and you mess up, and you're like, oh, I feel like I'm so far down. Well, I'll just start drinking because I can't deal with the fact that I had an abortion. Oh, well, I had a divorce. I can't deal with it, so I'm going to keep drinking. So I just kept spiraling and spiraling and spiraling. Depression, postpartum depression, and then finally you hit rock bottom which is really not rock bottom because there's always more. So there's a basement down there somewhere.
Right.
But you finally hit to a point where you're like, I am not dealing with what's underneath. And that's what the society does not, they don't project that. They just project, it's your right. Let me help you fix this and help you make this go away. And then they don't think about all the turmoil and even just the physical and emotional grief that comes after it. I mean, you just feel dirty and awful. I mean, that's how I felt. And some women may not, but I think that there's something alarming if you don't have a conviction about what happened, especially if you've had multiple and you don't feel like there's something wrong with that. That's a bigger issue. But for me, the conviction was I knew it was wrong. I never wanted to be in this position. But now I look at it as I was, and I have been forgiven. And even though I have my bad days where it hits me and I think, I get a little sad because I think, oh, I should have a sixth child out there. I look at it as hope that I will see him or her in heaven one day.
Oh, I have the same hope.
Yeah. And I'm like, they have been glorified body up in heaven. And Mom was not able to faithfully take the right step at that point, but she has been forgiven. And I have a prize waiting for me in heaven. And that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's taken a long time to get there. And again, I still have my days where I just feel so passionate for women that are struggling with it, that feel like they're labeled and that because they've had an abortion, they can't ever serve in ministry or, X, Y, and Z role, whatever they want to do
or it's
in life.
Unforgivable sin.
Yes,
I
that
know
it's
you had
just
mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
Did you struggle with that?
I did. I thought I was like, I've murdered somebody, and even though it's not, like what society considers murder, it was murder in my mind. And that's something I carry with me a lot. But, Jesus, he forgave the murderers.
He did.
He forgave the thieves. He forgives the pedophiles. He forgives all the ugly things that we think that cannot be forgiven. He forgives that man that sexually assaulted me, that I'm still working on forgiving and may never totally achieve. But if I can't accept that forgiveness, then to me, it's like I don't even deserve to have it because I have been given a gift and it's right here. And he's saying, take it. I love you, child. I've forgiven you, child. So it's a journey and it's one day at a time, just like recovery. But I would almost go to say, had I never had that abortion, I don't know if I would have ever gotten that far in my addiction.
So, you said when at your time at Renew, you started to actually process the abortion.
Yes.
Do you think that creating that distinction of guilt versus shame kind of unlocked a level of freedom for you from addiction?
Absolutely.
Like, was that the stronghold?
That was the stronghold, was the shame. The shame of letting my family down, of letting my friends down, letting just everyone that I know. I'm bad.
Yeah.
I did this and I can not be forgiven because you can't undo that. Some things we can't undo, but I cannot undo this.
Yeah.
And I just felt like I was always going to be labeled with that shame of you had an abortion. So when I really started digging into, everything that happened with the sexual assault at Renew, they had me write a letter to the guy that, obviously I didn't send it to him, but wrote a letter to the man that assaulted me. We ended up reading it as a group. We burned it in the parking lot. It was a beautiful thing. But that kind of started my whole healing process of how to move into, yes, I've had an abortion and I'm like humiliated to have to admit that. But I can remember it was almost 9 or 10 months after I was in the program, sitting in TK's office, and I just started crying and I said, I had an abortion and I've never talked about it the whole time through the program.
It took you that long?
It took me that long to get it out. I walked through the program twice. And the second time I finally got to a point where I was like, I just have to tell you, I've been carrying this and I've been afraid to talk about it because I don't want to be judged.
Wow.
And because I'm afraid to tell people in the group, I'm afraid to tell my family. Of course, my husband knows, but like, I don't want some of my friends to know, once you kind of learn to accept that grace and forgiveness, it just opens up another door of just saying,
you're not embarrassed about it anymore.
I'm like, I've been forgiven.
I'm forgiven.
Yes, and that's what it's all about. We're not supposed to live in shame.
Right.
I've done that for years, and it's just fed my addiction. And getting out of the shame is what honestly really helps my sobriety because I'm not wallowing in it anymore. So
and this is why I get fired up at the overall meta narratives that the secular world, the government, even the medical industry, the clinical industry, kind of tries to trickle down into society, into culture, and even into the church, that addiction's a brain disease. It's like, okay, it affects the brain. Yeah, you put poison in your body, it's going to affect your body. Okay. But to reduce addiction down to just being some kind of neurobiological happening in the brain. I mean, what you're talking about, these are spiritual strongholds. This is being reconciled to your God and your Creator, and knowing the knowledge of Christ has set you free from the darkness that continued your addiction. That has nothing to do with biology. That is totally spiritual in nature.
yeah.
And there's countless stories like that where people are using, not just because my brain's telling me to. I mean, that's not why people are using. People are using because they think God hates them, or they've done this sin they cannot get out of their mind, and they think because of the shame of it, or the sins that have been committed against them, the images they can't get out of their head, and the beliefs that have formed from that. And so whenever we say Jesus is the answer, the gospel is the answer, it's not some oversimplified answer to addiction to just pat some Bible verses on it. It's like, no, really? That's the truth. Because people need to be forgiven and receive forgiveness to break that chain so that they can stop trying to nurse it with drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
So
I would guarantee 9 times out of 10, if I were to ask somebody why they were drinking, if they were going out drinking, they're trying to cope with something else, trying to block something out, trying to forget something. Or, maybe there's that one person that's just super happy and wants to celebrate. But most people I've come into contact with, especially like in the recovery community, they have had something traumatic or even maybe smaller happen to them that they're trying to push out of their mind and heart. And so they just covered it with the drinking and the addiction. So
that's just a symptom.
Yeah. And so I can definitely relate with you. I personally don't feel like it's like a disease of the mind. I think there's probably some genetic factors in there.
Sure.
But
yeah,
if it were that easy, then we would just come up with a pill and then nobody would drink and everything would be all hunky-dory.
Right.
But when I think about the times that I've drank over the years, it was depression, it was shame, it was failure, it was hiding, it was divorce, it was not feeling like I'm enough. All of the things that are negative things is why I was drinking, because I didn't want to feel it. So of course I would just get drunk and then I don't have to feel it. And so it was just a vicious cycle of going over and over until finally I hit rock bottom and was like, I've got to deal with these things that are in my heart. And it was a lot, and I'm still working on it.
Totally.
I'll be working on it the rest of my life.
Right. But you had said that, the grief is something you'll probably deal with the rest of your life. I can absolutely relate to that. And it'll just hit me randomly, like out of nowhere, where, it'll bring tears to my eyes where I'm, when I'll just feel grief. And that could also be God's amazing grace to just keep me humble and vulnerable and clinging to Him. He can use these horrific things for our good and for His glory. But if you don't mind, I'd like to rewind just a little bit. And during your active addiction, what did that look like? I know that you were a mom during that time. Were you hiding it? What were some things that were happening? Like if there's like this one thing in your head where you're just like, oh, that just breaks my heart every time I think about it,
Yeah.
Like what are some of those things?
I would say where the worst of my addiction really started was when I socially drank through my 20s. But still took it to excess, trying to deal with depression and grief and just failure and not feeling where I wanted to be in life. I wanted to have a family. I wanted my life to look so much differently, so I just drank over it. But I would say it really took a turn after my second pregnancy was after COVID. Was before COVID, and I was at home with little babies by myself, and we were all stuck there, and I got very depressed, and I started drinking alone. And that's when my addiction really, really kicked in. And I'm very thankful to this day. I've got 5 beautiful, wonderful, healthy children, and I'm thankful that God has given me them. But I was actively drinking when I was pregnant with my last daughter. And that's something that I will always take with me and break my heart because, well, for one, I didn't know I was pregnant, but because I was so far in my addiction and it was a surprise, I've always carried that with me. And that's when it really hit me that like, okay, something is severely wrong right now. Because if you are having this much trouble coping with parenthood and motherhood and drinking, then something's got to give. And so that probably was rock bottom for me because I was in the OBGYN office and they're telling me I'm pregnant. And I'm like, well, I can't be pregnant. You know, I'm on birth control, but that's a lie. And, you know, here I was faced with, I had been drinking and I was 10 weeks along and I didn't know. So that pretty much has haunted me ever since it's happened. And I feel like by the grace of God that my sweet baby girl, Isabel, has just been a wonderful, healthy little blessing. But I feel like that was God looking out for me in my addiction when I could not control myself or my actions. And I was so depressed that I couldn't think about anything but me and what I wanted. So
would you say that, I mean, that's a big part of the addiction is just self-consumption?
Yes. And I truly, just a side note here, I truly never understood how powerful addiction was until I got into recovery. Because I would think, well, why would somebody want to commit suicide? Or why would somebody want to do this? Or why would somebody do that? Until I experienced the addiction take over myself, I didn't totally understand it because it just takes over your heart and your mind, and you're irrational, you're insane, you're not thinking clearly, and you become this person that you never thought you would be and you didn't want to be. And so I'm very compassionate about that, especially women that have been through abortion, people that deal with suicidal ideations, things like that. I'm very compassionate about that because I know what it's like to be in that really dark hole and think, I don't even know how to get out of here. What am I going to do? Am I just going to sit in this? Am I going to live like this? Am I going to drink the rest of my life? Am I going to, try to go forward? Or is so-and-so going to forgive me? Is somebody going to judge me because I've done X, Y, and Z? It's just all that shame just bogs you down. And I think that was really where my addiction really took a stronghold, and that's when I could not control it.
How did your family respond to your addiction and now in recovery?
Oh, my family has been wonderful. I was very nervous about it, but I finally got to a point when I hit my rock bottom and I needed to go to inpatient rehabilitation. And I remember telling my parents, and they knew, of course. But it was just, saying it out loud and telling them like, hey, I've got a problem and I'm going to have to get help. And they were like, yeah, we know. And they've been nothing but supportive. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins. I'm very open book, very transparent about everything now. Is something I walked through with TK about family secrets. For years it was like, let's not let people know. We need to keep up an appearance that we have everything together, and just try to, at least appear that we didn't totally lose it. And that was part of the church culture that I was in as well. But my parents have been the biggest support system. They have stuck by me in some really dark days and helped take care of my children when I could not be there to take care of them. My husband is my absolute biggest support system, and we're very open. I have my days where I'm like, man, I really want to drink today. I really do. And I'll go and tell him, I'll say, today is a day, it's a hard day, and I'm feeling it today. And I've found by talking about it, being open about it, staying in my recovery community, keeping up with my sponsor, staying in church. And of course, my first is my relationship with Jesus Christ is what's helping me stay on track. If I let those things go, that's a huge red flag. And I've told my brothers and sisters in my community, like, if you see me dropping out of meetings or not acting like Kathryn, like normally, like, please say something to me, because that means I'm struggling or I'm already starting to relapse in my mind.
And what's coming up for me as I listen to you talk, and I know, you're going back to school at Williamson College, you're leading recovery meetings, you're sharing your story. You are in a community, I would say, that's more affluent, and you're being open and honest about these things. I say affluent. It's like, the West Knoxville kind of area. But I feel like you are breaking a seal that needs to be broken of, I've struggled. I really screwed up in life. I really, I had an addiction. And because addiction, it touches everybody. It's not just on the south side of town, it's not just in one certain population, it's everywhere. It's with everyone, everyone's affected in some way. And so, as I'm sitting here listening to you just share your story and talk, it's no wonder that Satan tried to hold you down for so long. Because I think God's got an incredible purpose for your life. You're a natural born leader. And that's just what's coming up for me. And so I just wonder, how often that's what's happening in the spiritual world.
Yeah.
The spirit realm is Satan knows the good plans that God has for people.
Well, it's definitely an adjustment. I've had to change everything in my life. I will say that pretty much everything. My friend circles, where I go, what I do. And at first it was hard and it bothered me because I felt like I'd lost friendships, which I did, but they weren't healthy friendships.
Sure.
They weren't who I needed to be around. So, but alcohol is so popular. It's everywhere. It's at baby showers. It's at kids' birthday parties. Just anywhere but probably church you can go and there's alcohol served. So it's not cool. It's not, the hip thing to be the person that doesn't drink, but it doesn't bother me as much anymore because I'm so satisfied with my sobriety and how much better I feel. But it is hard being one of the few walking alone in the mom circles, or like when some of the ladies want to go out for dinner and drinks and you're like, oh, I probably shouldn't do that, and you do kind of feel like the ugly duckling in a way because you're like, oh, what's wrong with me? But instead of looking at it that way, I look at it as I'm proud of this and I have a whole new community of new brothers and sisters that I spend my time with and that I invest my time with that are on the same page as me. And I'm not saying that all my friends are in recovery, but my friendships in general are just at a much healthier level. The people that I call on, I know will pick up the phone. And so that's another thing about recovery is you really learn who's there for you. Yeah.
That's so true. It's so true. I just applaud you. I know that I'm sure some of your social structures have changed. I'm sure that there have been some friends that are no longer around. But the fact of the matter is, even the people who may not be around or talking, you're still leaving an impact. They can't unknow or unsee what God has done in your life and what you're saying. Like, you are planting seeds. Even if you think people aren't listening, or even if they have walked away because your lifestyle's changed and for whatever reason, that's still a testimony to them. And you never know what kind of seed that you plant in someone. It could be years down the road where somebody comes up and says to you, I wasn't ready to hear it then, but I'm ready to hear it now, and I have a similar issue. So just never underestimate your impact, even in the people who have been silent.
You never know who needs to hear what you have to say, and I found that out when I shared my story for the first time at Mom Life at Shoreline, and I had 3 women come up to me afterwards and say, I'm in a very similar boat, and I've lived with this, and I've carried this for a long time. And I just think that we as Christians in the church need to be more compassionate towards women that have been through abortion, because that is not who they are. They made a mistake, just like we've all made mistakes.
And the grief can be unbearable.
And the grief can be unbearable. And why would we let them suffer on their own? Because we've been called, by Jesus to help our brothers and sisters suffer. So, it's a commandment to me. And so I get really worked up about it because I've had a long journey of it over the last 18 years. And it's had its ups and downs, and right now it's good because I feel like I'm really starting to godly grief, as you said. But it is something that I think that a female will just carry always, and just as a mother, you just always carry that. And I have my times where I feel guilty, like if somebody's having trouble getting pregnant. Like some of my friends have been infertility issues. Like it makes me feel guilty because I'm like, oh, I had an opportunity and I wasn't strong enough to take on that child. So it's stuff like that that'll trigger me and hit me, and the devil tries to creep in and shame me into like, I can't believe you did that. And then I just try to pray and turn around and ask God to say, remind me, you died for a reason, and you did it for me. So who am I to not accept that grace and forgiveness?
But that's a great point that you're bringing up. Just because you've been delivered from that stronghold doesn't mean that you're not still tempted by it from time to time, but you've learned that it is a war, and you've got to take that thought captive and discipline it to the knowledge of Christ, which is what people have to learn in recovery. It's not that you're never, when people are set free and chains are broken, I think sometimes people get discouraged whenever temptation comes back, or, the feeling wears off or whatever. It's like, no, that'll happen, but you don't have to give into it. You don't have to listen to it. It doesn't have to eat your lunch anymore.
Yes. Well, and something
You can say no.
Yeah, something I do want to touch on, going back just a little bit. I think that sometimes our culture and society, people in general, when it has been a forced situation, a sexual assault, that people tend to give you kind of the card as a pass because you didn't cause this, so why would you want to keep the child? I've wrestled with that for years because of so many people that have, when they found out, were like, well, it's not your fault, so why would you? That's a whole different kind of grief to carry. It really is for me. And I'm not saying that one is easier than the other because everybody has a different situation as to why they had an abortion. But for me, I almost like double grieved it, I felt like.
Sure. Because
I had been forced to do something I didn't want to do. And then I felt forced to, have the abortion. And then it was just like, I ran from it. I got as far away from as I could and just started drinking. And that's another thing is like they don't offer therapy or help or counseling, anything after you happen. They just do their job and then you go on your way, and it's very sad. It's a very the whole thing is a very depressing thing.
It really is. I mean, I can remember it's a despairing atmosphere.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it's so cold and transactional, and there's something horrific happening that nobody acknowledges that it's happening.
Yeah.
It's a very bizarre atmosphere. And I've even watched a few like YouTube videos on abortionists who have now repented, placed their faith in Christ. And the way that they describe their mentality, having to perform an abortion, which they've repented, the Lord's forgiven them. One, I think, had performed about 1,200 abortions. And he said, I knew what I was doing. I didn't care. And I was like, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. He had to train his brain, train his mind, and train his thinking to literally change and be a different person to be able to do that. And it was just, it had to turn into something just very transactional. Because he would go in one room and deliver a baby and then go in another room and perform an abortion. And he said that it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
Mr. Jekyll, I don't remember, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. And so, but that's the way the whole atmosphere feels in an abortion clinic, is just like, it's like there's this big bloody elephant in the room that nobody will acknowledge. And it creates a spiritually dead and oppressive feeling. To say the least.
It's like our country, it's a very scary place to be when we start to play God and we do not value that sanctity of life.
Right. And determine who gets to live and die based on
That is a very
my
scary place to be.
preferences. Yeah. Or my comfort, or what I feel comfortable with, or I get to dictate. Yeah. And you know, you hear about those stories too. You had mentioned earlier about women who have had multiple ones, but I've heard of stories where it does hit their conscience after they've had 9.
Yeah.
I mean, that's devastating. I mean, that could truly cause like a mental breakdown in somebody to really understand the implications. And that has happened to a lot of women. And I just think it's such a lie from the pit of hell to A, call it healthcare, and B, to trick women or to lead women into deception that this is actually something that is for them and not against them.
Yeah.
It's a trap.
Yeah.
It's a trap. But you know, this is a hard thing to talk about, and I'm just thankful that you have been willing to just openly talk about this with me. If you could leave the listener with one word of encouragement, let's say it's somebody who has had an abortion and she is struggling deeply right now with feelings of shame and guilt and condemnation, what would you say to her?
I would say you've been forgiven. There is no sin that is unpardonable, and that Jesus is waiting right there for you to give it to him. And that doesn't mean that it's going to go away as far as the emotions and the hurt feelings. They're going to come and go. But he's willing to take that and bear that on for you and with you. So I would encourage any female that's been through an abortion, that's not who you are. And that was a choice that you made. It's in the past. You know, God has forgiven you. It's time to move forward.
Would you say that, you know, the forgiveness transaction happens when we go to him and ask for forgiveness, right? It's like, Lord, so I would just add on to that, like, in Christ, not just by osmosis, some nebulous God, but in Christ, because he actually came to earth and shed his blood for the remission of your sins. So in Christ and in Christ alone, when you come to him, you will absolutely be forgiven.
Yes. And another thing, I think it's so important to talk about it, to seek help about it and not bury it, to
go tell somebody.
To go tell somebody, go talk to a friend, go talk to a therapist, go join a group and get it out and be vulnerable about it and talk about it.
Yeah.
Because the more you talk about it, the more comfortable you're going to be with sharing with somebody else that maybe is going through it, and you can help that person. And then you'll find a satisfaction yourself and a reward yourself by saying, oh, I helped somebody because I know what it's like to be there and I know what that feels like.
There's a sense of purpose behind it at that point.
And then you don't feel like everything is lost. You know, you're like, oh, I've been through this. It was awful, but maybe I can use this to help somebody else that's like really in the thick of it. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And I have read this verse for many years, and I've felt it near and dear to my heart. So that would be another piece of encouragement I would give any woman that's struggling with, you know, the post emotions of abortion or the grieving, or maybe you're thinking about it, or you know, whatever you might be in your boat. That he is with you, and he knows your crushed and broken spirit, and he can heal it and he can fix it.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep.
This has been Waging War. Thanks for fighting alongside us this week.